15 years ago, when I first stepped onto the neatly paved sidewalks of Oak Ridge Estates, I thought I had found the perfect place to raise my family. The lawns were manicured, the houses well kept, and the streets lined with friendly neighbors who waved as they passed by. My wife, Sarah, and I had spent months researching different communities, weighing school quality, safety ratings, and affordability before making our decision. Oak Ridge stood out not just for its amenities, the community pool, the clubhouse, the well-maintained parks, but for its warmth. The Homeowners Association had a reputation for being fair, and its longtime president, a retired school principal, prioritized family values over petty rule enforcement. It felt like home in every sense of the word. And for years, it was. Back then, the HOA worked to bring people together. Monthly barbecues filled the air with the scent of grilled burgers and laughter. Summer meant pool parties where neighborhood kids raced each other in cannonball contests, and during the holidays, families competed in friendly decorating contests that turned our cul-de-sac into a glowing wonderland. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a place to belong. When our son, Noah, was born, Sarah and I felt reassured knowing he would grow up in a community that looked out for one another. We imagined him riding his bike through the quiet streets, making friends with the kids next door, and thriving in an environment where neighbors didn't just recognize each other, they cared. For a long time, our life in Oak Ridge Estates was exactly what we had hoped for. Then everything changed. First in our family, then in our neighborhood. Noah was 12 when we got the news. A routine eye surgery, meant to correct a minor vision problem, went catastrophically wrong. The surgeon made a mistake, an irreversible one, severing Noah's optic nerve. The world he had known, full of color and light, vanished in an instant. What should have been a short recovery period turned into a nightmare of endless doctor visits, legal battles over medical malpractice, and agonizing questions we could never answer. When Noah came home from his final hospital stay, he was no longer the same carefree boy who once sprinted down the driveway on his scooter. He was withdrawn, terrified of a world he could no longer see. At first, the community responded the way we had expected. Neighbors brought us meals, offered to drive Noah to therapy sessions, and reassured us that he would find his way again. It was one of the hardest times of our lives, but knowing we had a supportive community softened the blow. For a while, we still believed Oak Ridge was the right place for Noah to recover. Then Sarah got sick. It started as a lump, a small concern that we told ourselves was nothing. But by the time the doctors confirmed what we feared, it was too late. The next 18 months were a blur of hospital rooms, chemotherapy, and desperate hope. I took a leave of absence from work to care for her and Noah, watching helplessly as my wife's body weakened and my son withdrew even further. We tried to keep life normal for Noah, but how do you explain to a boy who's already lost his sight that he's about to lose his mother too? When Sarah passed away, something inside Noah broke. His grades plummeted, his laughter disappeared, and there were days when he refused to leave his room at all. He stopped trying to learn Braille, refused mobility training, and muttered that there was no point in getting up when all he would ever see was darkness. The world had already taken so much from him, and now it had stolen the person he needed most. A therapist suggested a guide dog, explaining that beyond assisting with mobility, a service animal could provide the emotional support Noah desperately needed. We were warned that the waiting list was long, sometimes over a year, but by some stroke of luck, a cancellation moved us up. Within months, Noah was introduced to Buddy, a golden retriever trained to match his gait, sense his hesitation, and guide him through obstacles. They spent 6 weeks together at a specialized facility in Colorado, training daily until their bond was inseparable. When Buddy finally came home with us, it was as if someone had flipped a switch inside my son. For the first time since Sarah's death, Noah smiled again. He no longer hesitated when stepping outside. With Buddy by his side, he started taking walks on his own, learning how to navigate the world with confidence. He even rejoined the swim team at school, surprising everyone by competing again despite his blindness. Most importantly, he talked about the future, not just in vague, resigned terms, but with real hope. College. Career goals. Maybe even dating. Every morning, I watched from the window as Noah and Buddy took their usual route to the community mailbox. It was a short walk, just 3 blocks down the street, but to Noah, it represented something monumental. Independence. Strength. A promise that he was still capable of living a full life, even in darkness. At the time, I thought the hardest battles were behind us. I had no idea that a greater storm was brewing just beneath the surface. And when it came, it would not only threaten my son's newfound independence, it would attempt to take it away entirely. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a letter. A crisp, white envelope with the Oak Ridge Estates HOA logo stamped in the corner, taped neatly to our front door. At first, I assumed it was another routine notice, maybe a reminder about landscaping guidelines or an update on community events. But when I opened it, I found something else entirely. Effective immediately, all animals residing within Oak Ridge Estates must be registered with the HOA office. A $150 violation fee has been assessed for failure to register an unauthorized animal. Please remit payment within 7 days to avoid further penalties. I frowned. I hadn't received any prior notice about this new rule, and I was well aware that federal law exempted service animals from HOA fees. To keep the peace, I decided to address it in person. The next morning, I walked into the HOA office, paperwork in hand, Buddy's service animal certification, ADA documentation, and even a check for the so-called registration fee. The office had changed. What was once a warm, inviting space with community bulletins and children's artwork pinned to the walls had been stripped down to something cold and sterile. A large, newly installed surveillance camera sat in the corner, its red light blinking as if to remind everyone they were being watched. Instead of friendly neighborhood announcements, a massive sign listed HOA violations and steep fines for everything from excessive lawn ornamentation to unauthorized flags. Brenda, the office manager who had worked for the HOA for over a decade, barely met my eyes as she took my paperwork. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the documents, her gaze flickering toward the closed door of the inner office. "I should mention," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Miss Klein has been particular about animal documentation lately. Keep copies of everything." Before I could respond, the office door swung open, and Deborah Klein stepped into the room. I had only seen her in passing, but the HOA newsletters often included her photo, a tall, silver-haired woman with an air of precision, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "A new dog in the community?" she asked, her voice pleasant but clipped. I cleared my throat. "Yes, this is for my son's guide dog, Buddy. I just registered him with Brenda." "How nice," she said smoothly, scanning my paperwork. Her fingers tapped lightly against the desk as she studied the embossed service vest Buddy wore in the printed photos. "We'll be in touch if there are any issues." I left the office that day feeling uneasy. There was something in the way she had looked at Buddy, as if she wasn't seeing a service animal but a problem that needed to be removed. A week later, my suspicion was confirmed. Another envelope arrived, this time taped to our mailbox. Violation notice, $300 fine for unregistered animal. I called the HOA office immediately. This time, Deborah herself answered. "There must be a mistake," I said, keeping my voice measured. "I registered Buddy last week. I have a receipt." "Service animals aren't exempt from our regulations, Mr. Carter," she said smoothly. "The board voted on additional certification requirements last week. Your dog does not meet our new standards." My grip tightened around the phone. "What additional requirements?" "We weren't notified of any changes. The updates were posted on the community website," she replied. We now require service animals to have special certification from our approved veterinarian. It's a simple process. Just $350 for the examination and certification fee. I felt my stomach turn. That's illegal, I said evenly. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act explicitly prohibit charging fees for service animals or creating barriers to reasonable accommodations. My son is legally blind. Buddy is necessary for his independence and mobility. There was a pause before she responded. Many people claim disabilities these days, she said dismissively. We have our own legal counsel. Thank you for your concern. The line went dead. That night, I spent hours researching. I knew what I had heard was wrong, blatantly illegal, but I needed to be sure. Every source confirmed what I already suspected: the HOA had no legal authority to impose additional restrictions on a service animal. I fired off an email to the HOA board, citing federal disability laws, ADA protections, and legal precedents. I attached Buddy's official certifications, the receipt proving his registration, and Department of Justice guidelines stating that HOAs could not charge additional fees or require special certification beyond what federal law mandates. The next day passed without a response. Then another. By the third day, I began to wonder if my email had somehow been blocked. Then my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Ethan, it's Jim Thompson. I recognized his voice instantly. He was one of the few long-standing board members who had stayed after the leadership shift. He sounded nervous. I got your email, he said in a hushed voice. I'm calling from my office downtown, not from home. This conversation needs to stay between us. I shut my laptop and sat up straighter. What's going on? Jim hesitated. Deborah is out of control. But she's convinced most of the board to follow her lead. They're afraid of her. She's threatened legal action against anyone who opposes her, claiming they're violating their fiduciary duty to the community. But what she's doing is illegal, I said, my jaw tightening. Surely someone on the board sees that. Oh, I see it, Jim said. I'm not the only one. But you don't understand, Ethan, she's got connections. She's been using her brother-in-law, Officer Dan Klein, to enforce HOA rules. That means if she wants you fined, if she wants you harassed, she's got the local police in her pocket. I felt a chill creep up my spine. She's not just targeting you, Jim continued, lowering his voice. Several residents with disabilities have found themselves under scrutiny lately. The Parkers, remember them? They requested permission to install a wheelchair ramp last month. Denied. The Shaws, family with an autistic son, fined for having therapy equipment visible from the street. I clenched my fists. Be careful, Ethan, Jim warned. She's not just trying to enforce rules, she's trying to force certain people out. That night, I installed security cameras around my house. I backed up every email, every violation notice, and every recorded interaction. I had spent years in this neighborhood believing we had built a home. I had fought through the darkest moments of my life to help Noah find his way again. And now, Deborah Klein was threatening to take that from him. She had no idea what kind of fight she had just started. The harassment started subtly at first, almost as if Deborah wanted us to second-guess whether it was even happening. A notice here, a fine there. The first violation after the registration dispute was for leaving our garbage cans on the curb past designated collection hours. The problem was, we had brought them in on time, just like always. I paid the fine, annoyed but not yet alarmed. Then, 2 days later, a new citation arrived, this time for an unauthorized plant species, in our front yard. I had no idea what they were talking about. We hadn't planted anything new in years. When I checked the front lawn, I found a printed list of HOA-approved plant varieties taped to our mailbox, marked with a red circle and a handwritten note, "Remove or replace within 48 hours to avoid penalty." That week, it became clear this was no coincidence. The notices were arriving strategically, always on days when Noah had medical or therapy appointments, always with deadlines that required me to take time off work. I started getting alerts from my security system. Small things at first. A motion detection alert late at night showing a shadowy figure near our porch. The sound of someone stepping onto our driveway at odd hours. When I checked the footage, I found blurry images of someone placing something near our mailbox and leaving. Then, Noah came home from school shaking. I was in the kitchen when he walked in, his fingers gripping Buddy's harness so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. "Dad," he said, his voice thin and unsteady. "Someone stopped me at the community entrance today." I set down the dish I was washing and turned to him. "What do you mean, stopped you?" His hands trembled as he unzipped his jacket. "A man. He said he was with the HOA. He told me that Buddy wasn't allowed on common property anymore. That if I didn't have an official HOA permit, I was violating community rules." My stomach twisted. "Did he touch you?" Noah shook his head. "No. But he took pictures of Buddy. Of me. He said they'd be filing a report for aggressive animal behavior. Buddy, who was trained to be calm, obedient, and never react aggressively, stood beside him, ears tilted forward, as if he understood what had happened." I gritted my teeth. "Did you get his name?" "No. But he had a clipboard and a yellow tag on his shirt. He said I could either call for an escort home or remove the dog from the property." A sharp, cold anger coiled inside me. I knew Deborah had orchestrated this. She had just physically intimidated my blind son. That evening, my phone rang again. It was Margaret Reynolds, the retired judge who lived 3 streets over. She got straight to the point. "Ethan, what happened today with Noah is part of a pattern," she said. "I've been documenting similar cases here for months. I contacted my colleagues at the Justice Department. They're watching this now." She told me about the wheelchair ramp requests that had been denied, the therapy equipment fines, the families being harassed over minor infractions. The more she talked, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just harassment. It was targeted discrimination. The next morning, I found dog waste smeared across our porch. A printed note taped to the front door read, "No pets. No exceptions. Move out." I checked the security footage immediately. What I saw made my blood run cold. At exactly 5:30 a.m., Victoria Dawson, one of Deborah's closest allies on the HOA board, walked up our driveway, a bag in her hand. She knelt by our porch, emptied the contents, then smoothed the note onto our door before walking away. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I sent the footage to Margaret. She called me within minutes. "This is criminal," she said. "They're escalating. We need to move fast." That night, I arranged a secret meeting at her house. Other victims showed up. Sarah Chang, whose elderly mother had been denied reasonable accommodations for wheelchair access. Mark Evans, a decorated Marine veteran whose therapy dog had been classified as an emotional support animal, just so the HOA could refuse him housing protections. The Martinez family, whose 12-year-old autistic daughter had been banned from the community pool for disruptive behavior, even though no such policy existed in any HOA guidelines. "This isn't just mean-spirited," Margaret said after hearing everyone's stories. "This is systematic civil rights violations. And it's illegal." By the end of the night, we had a plan. We would document everything. Every violation notice, every interaction, every attempt at intimidation. We would submit official complaints to the DOJ and the Fair Housing Administration. And, most importantly, we would make sure that Deborah Klein and her corrupt network had nowhere left to hide. We just didn't know that, in the shadows, the FBI had already been watching. The morning started like any other. Noah sat at the kitchen table, absently tracing his fingers over the rim of his coffee mug while Buddy lay at his feet, ears perked up as he always was when Noah got ready for his daily walk. It was part of his independence routine, a short but meaningful journey to the community mailbox 3 blocks away. He had practiced it dozens of times, his confidence growing with every step, the rhythmic tap of his white cane blending with the steady movement of Buddy's guiding paws. "Back in 20 minutes, Dad," he called as he adjusted Buddy's harness. I watched from the doorway, pride swelling in my chest. After everything he had been through, he was finally reclaiming a sense of control over his life. What I didn't know was that Deborah Klein had been waiting for this moment. At exactly 9:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. The front door camera had detected motion. I glanced at the screen, and felt my blood turn to ice. On the sidewalk in front of our house stood Officer Dan Klein, in full uniform. Beside him was a metal animal crate. Deborah stood behind him, arms crossed, a smug smirk curling her lips. Through the crisp high-definition footage, I saw Noah stop mid-step, his grip tightening on Buddy's harness. He couldn't see them, but he must have felt the tension in the air, sensed that something was wrong. "Stop right there," Officer Klein ordered, raising a hand in an authoritative gesture. "This animal is unauthorized on HOA property and is being confiscated immediately." Noah hesitated, confusion flashing across his face. "Who's there? What's happening?" "Officer Klein, County Police," the man barked. "I'm responding to a community ordinance violation. This dog has been deemed a non-compliant animal under HOA regulations." Noah's breath hitched. He instinctively reached down to touch Buddy's head, seeking reassurance. "He's my guide dog," he said, his voice rising with fear. "You can't take him. I need him to see." The footage captured the exact moment when Officer Klein bent down, unhooked Buddy's harness, and lured him toward the crate with a treat. Buddy resisted at first, his training had conditioned him never to leave his handler's side. But when the officer forcefully guided him forward, Buddy complied, tail low, ears pinned back. Noah reached out blindly, his hand grasping at empty air. His breath quickened. "Buddy? Where's Buddy?" From the security feed, I saw Deborah's smug satisfaction as she watched Noah crumble. Then, she delivered the final blow. "This is a private community," she said smoothly. HOA regulations supersede federal guidelines when it comes to safety standards. If you want to contest this, feel free to take it up with the board. I was already racing out the door. I don't remember how I got there so fast. One moment, I was inside. The next, I was standing between my son and the man who had just taken his only lifeline to the world. What the hell is going on here? My voice was a controlled fury. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. "Sir, I'm enforcing community policies," Officer Klein said, stiffening. "Your son has been warned multiple times about unauthorized animals." I cut him off. "Buddy is a federally protected service animal. What you are doing right now is a criminal act. That badge doesn't give you the right to override the ADA and Fair Housing Act." "This is a civil HOA matter," Deborah interjected, her tone condescending. "Not a criminal issue. Officer Klein is well within his rights to enforce." "You're impersonating law enforcement for HOA business," I snapped. "And you just illegally seized a service animal. That's a federal offense, Deborah. You just made the biggest mistake of your life." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that an unmarked sedan had been parked across the street for weeks, its occupants carefully documenting every illegal act committed by the HOA. Inside that car sat Special Agent Sam Parker and his team from the FBI. They had captured everything. Harold Mitchell, our next-door neighbor, had also witnessed the scene unfold. He stepped outside, phone raised, recording. Other neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves. At that moment, a patrol sergeant arrived, one of the few officers not under Deborah's influence. He took one look at the situation and his face darkened. "Officer Klein," he said, voice dangerously calm. "What exactly is going on here?" Klein straightened. "I'm responding to an HOA complaint." "That's not what dispatch shows," the sergeant interrupted. "And since when do we enforce private HOA policies?" "Step away from the crate." Silence fell over the street. Then, the sergeant gave a second, sharper order. "Now." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in Officer Klein's expression. Slowly, he stepped back. The sergeant turned to me. "Sir, is this a service animal under federal law?" "Yes," I said immediately. "My son is blind. That dog is his mobility aid. The HOA is conducting an illegal campaign to force us out of the neighborhood." The sergeant nodded. "That aligns with complaints we've been receiving. Officer Klein, I need your badge and firearm. Now." Deborah's face drained of color. "Wait, this isn't. You might want to call your attorney," the sergeant cut her off. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a civil rights violation, and a criminal conspiracy." A murmur rippled through the small crowd of onlookers. This was it. Klein reluctantly removed his badge. I turned to Noah, who was kneeling beside the crate, reaching through the bars to touch Buddy's fur. His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's okay," he told his dog, stroking his head. "They're not gonna take you away again. I promise." I clenched my fists, my jaw tight with emotion. "Neither will I vowed." At that moment, my phone buzzed with a blocked caller ID. I answered. "Mr. Carter, this is Special Agent Parker with the FBI Civil Rights Division. We've been monitoring your situation for weeks. What happened today just gave us everything we need." I glanced at Deborah, who was still frozen in shock, watching her perfect little empire collapse. "Mr. Carter," Parker continued. "We need you to come in. We're about to take her down." The fallout was swift and unforgiving. That same evening, FBI agents swarmed the HOA office, seizing records, computers, and financial documents. Deborah Klein was arrested on multiple federal charges, including civil rights violations, mail fraud, and conspiracy. Her brother-in-law, Officer Dan Klein, was taken into custody for abuse of power, falsifying police reports, and illegally enforcing private HOA regulations under the guise of law enforcement. Several other board members quickly turned on her, offering up emails, financial records, and meeting minutes that exposed a years-long scheme to systematically force out disabled residents and financially profit off the properties they left behind. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails where Deborah referred to disabled residents as property value reducers. Security footage of board members planting false violations on targeted homes. Financial records showing HOA funds misappropriated to bribe officials and manipulate local zoning policies. In one recorded conversation, Deborah outright stated, "No one wants to buy into a neighborhood full of defective people. We're just cleaning house." That single sentence destroyed any chance of her avoiding prison. The community turned against her almost overnight. Residents who had remained silent out of fear suddenly found their voices. At the emergency HOA meeting, over 350 homeowners packed the room, spilling out into the parking lot. One by one, people shared their stories, families who had been fined into financial distress, disabled residents forced to leave, single parents harassed for minor infractions. The remaining HOA board members resigned on the spot, and under unanimous vote, a new leadership team was formed, with Margaret Reynolds stepping in as interim president. With the HOA under new management, the first act of business was repealing every discriminatory policy Deborah had put in place. Fines were refunded, accessibility requests were approved, and a formal public apology was issued to the families targeted. More importantly, new safeguards were introduced, including an independent oversight committee to ensure that no HOA president could ever abuse their power like this again. But the most meaningful change happened the day Noah and Buddy walked their now famous route to the mailbox again, this time surrounded by hundreds of neighbors. The event, organized in secret, became a community-wide statement against discrimination. Homeowners, children, even local businesses came out, lining the sidewalks in support. Some carried signs, "Noah and Buddy belong here. Fair housing for all. This is our community." When Noah reached the mailbox, Buddy guiding him forward with practiced ease, the entire crowd erupted into cheers. A few months later, Buddy's law was passed, strengthening federal protections for service animals in HOA-governed communities and making it a federal offense for HOAs to impose discriminatory barriers against disabled residents. Noah, once the quiet, withdrawn boy who had lost so much, became an advocate, speaking at local and national events, his story a symbol of resilience and justice. As for Deborah, she took a plea deal. 18 months in federal prison, $750,000 in fines, a lifetime ban from ever serving on an HOA board again, and 500 hours of community service with disability organizations, a poetic punishment for someone who once tried to erase disabled people from her perfect little neighborhood. Looking back, I realized that this fight was never just about one boy and his dog. It was about something bigger, the right to exist, to belong, to live free from fear of those who think power gives them the right to control others. So now I ask you, have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or a Karen, who thought they could rewrite the rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.